The call came at 2:47 in the morning, and Renata Osi almost didn't answer it. She was already in her car, sitting in the parking structure of St. Benedict Medical Center with her hands on the wheel and her eyes closed, waiting for the shaking to stop. It had been that kind of shift. The kind where you lose someone you weren't supposed to lose, where the attending says, "You did everything right," and somehow that makes it worse. She had been a trauma nurse for 6 years, and she still hadn't figured out how to drive home after a night like this without sitting in the dark for 20 minutes first. Her phone buzzed against the center console. She looked at the screen. It was her mother. She almost let it go to voicemail. Then she thought about how her mother only called after midnight when something was wrong, so she picked up. Renata. Her mother's voice was small in a way Renata had never heard before. "It's your Uncle Desmond." He collapsed at the house. "They're saying it's his heart. They took him to Ridgeway." Renata was already starting the engine. Ridgeway Regional was 40 minutes away under normal conditions. At 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, she could make it in 30. She knew that drive. She had done it 100 times visiting her uncle when he was still teaching at the community college out there, before he retired and started spending his winters in the house he'd bought near the lake. She knew which exits to take, knew where the speed cameras were, knew the stretch of Route 9 where the road curved sharp and the guardrail came out of nowhere. She did not know there would be a checkpoint. It wasn't an official DUI checkpoint. She found that out later. It was what the Harwick County Sheriff's Department called a safety corridor enforcement stop, which was a term her attorney would later explain that had no statutory definition whatsoever. They had set up 3 cruisers across the shoulder of Route 9 just past mile marker 44, with orange cones pulling the right lane down to a crawl. Renata slowed. She rolled down her window. She had nothing to hide. She hadn't had a drink in 4 days. She was in her scrubs, navy blue with the St. Benedict logo on the chest, and she had her hospital badge still clipped to her pocket and her hands visible on the wheel, because that was something her father had told her to do before she ever got her license, and she had never once forgotten it. The deputy who came to her window was named Strick. She learned that from the nameplate. He was maybe 30, with the particular look of a man who had decided very early that authority was the most important thing in any room. Lice and registration. She gave it to him. She watched him look at it longer than necessary. "Where are you coming from tonight?" "Work," she said. "St. Benedict Medical. I'm a nurse. I just finished a shift. Where are you headed?" "Ridgeway Regional. My uncle had a cardiac event. My family called me." Strick looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the badge on her scrubs. Then he looked back at her license. "Have you been drinking tonight?" "No." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure," she said, and she kept her voice even. She had learned to keep her voice even. "I've been at work for 12 hours. I'm trying to get to my family. Step out of the vehicle, please." She looked at him. "I'm sorry?" "Step out of the vehicle." "Can I ask why?" "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again." She stepped out. The night was cold, late October, and she hadn't brought a jacket because she had run out of the hospital the moment her shift ended and hadn't thought about anything except getting to her car. She stood on the shoulder of Route 9 with trucks going past 40 feet away and the wind cutting through her scrub top, and she kept her hands visible, and she did not say anything she would regret. Strick walked a slow circle around her. Then he said he smelled alcohol. "I haven't been drinking," Renata said. "I'm detecting a strong odor. I'm a trauma nurse. I've been in a hospital for 12 hours. You might be smelling surgical antiseptic. You might be smelling any number of things that are not alcohol. I have not had a drink. I'm going to need you to take a field sobriety test." She took it. She walked the line. She followed the light. She recited the alphabet. She did everything he asked with the precision of someone who understood exactly what was happening and exactly how important it was to not give him anything he could use. He told her she had failed. She asked him which part. He said her eyes were showing nystagmus. Renata Osi had spent 6 years assessing patients for neurological symptoms. She knew what nystagmus was. She also knew that standing on an uneven gravel shoulder in the wind, with truck headlights periodically blasting past, with a stimulus light being moved too quickly by an officer who may or may not have been trained to the standard, none of that was a clean environment for assessing involuntary eye movement. She knew all of this. She said none of it. because she had already understood that Strick was not interested in what she knew. He told her he was detaining her while he waited for a blood test kit from his partner. She asked him if she could call her mother to let her family know she was delayed. He said she could not use her phone. She said, "My uncle is in cardiac arrest." Strick said, "Ma'am, you are being detained. That means you stand here." So she stood there. For 41 minutes, she counted. She watched the second hand on the clock visible through her car window, and she counted every minute because she needed something to hold on to, and counting was something she could control. At some point, the second cruiser came back with the kit. At some point, another deputy, a woman named Okonkwo, appeared and stood to Renata's left without speaking. At some point, the wind got colder, and Renata started shaking and told herself it was only the temperature. The blood draw was done on the shoulder of Route 9, not at a facility, not by a medical professional, by a deputy who tore the packaging with his teeth and told her to hold still. Renata Osei, who had placed IVs in moving ambulances, in children who were terrified, in patients who were combative, and patients who were unconscious and patients who had veins like threads, watched this man miss her vein and try again and did not say a single word. The results would take 72 hours, Strick told her. In the meantime, she was free to go. He said it like he was doing her a favor. She got back in her car. She drove to Ridgeway Regional. Her uncle Desmond was still alive in the ICU, sedated, and the cardiologist told her family they had gotten to him in time. Her mother held her hand in the waiting room and asked what had happened to make her so late, and Renata said, "Traffic," because she didn't have the words for the other thing yet. The blood test came back clean. 0.00. She received the result in an email with no apology attached. She thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 weeks later, she got a letter from the Harwick County DA's office. Deputy Strick had filed a report stating that during the stop on Route 9, Renata had been verbally combative and had attempted to physically interfere with the blood draw procedure. The letter informed her that she was being investigated for obstruction and resisting a lawful order. She read the letter twice, then she read it a third time because she was certain she had missed something. She had not missed anything. She called the hospital's employee assistance line. They gave her the number of an attorney named Gerald Osei, no relation, who handled civil rights cases in the county. Gerald Osei listened to everything she said, asked her 12 very specific questions, and then was quiet for a moment. "Did you record anything?" he asked. "No," she said. "My phone was in my jacket in the back seat. I couldn't reach it." Another silence. "Did anyone else record it?" "I don't know," she said. "There were other cars. The road was open, just slowed down." "Okay," Gerald said. "Here's what I need you to do. I need you to write down everything you remember, every detail, in the order it happened, starting from the moment you saw the cones. Do it tonight while it's fresh. Time everything as precisely as you can. And Renata, don't talk to anyone from the sheriff's department without me present. Not a word." She wrote for 2 hours, 12 pages. She included the temperature, the direction of the wind, the specific order of instructions she had been given, the way Strick had torn the needle packaging with his teeth, the 41 minutes she had counted, all of it. She had been trained to document. She documented. Gerald filed a records request for Strick's dashcam and bodycam footage. The department responded that Strick's bodycam had malfunctioned during the stop. The dashcam footage had been recorded over per standard protocol. Gerald told Renata this on a Thursday afternoon, and she sat in her car in the hospital parking garage and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the weather. "They do this," he said. "It's not always deliberate. Sometimes it's just convenient. Is there anything left?" Gerald paused. "I put in a request to the traffic authority for the corridor camera. There's a state infrastructure camera at mile marker 42 and one at mile marker 47. Your stop was at 44. The angle may not give us much, but I asked." The camera at mile marker 47 had a partial view. It was not video. It was still image capture, one frame every 30 seconds, used for traffic density monitoring. The image quality was not good. But at 3:18 a.m., in a frame that showed the right shoulder of Route 9, there was a woman in dark scrubs standing next to a car with her hands at her sides, and there was a deputy standing close enough that the technical analyst Gerald hired later estimated the distance between them at under 2 feet. And in the frame at 3:22 a.m., there was the same woman in the same position, Same hands at her sides, body angled slightly away. She is not reaching toward the officer, the analyst's report stated. She is not leaning toward the officer. Her posture is consistent with someone who is stationary and compliant. Gerald called her the morning he received the report. It's not everything, he said, but it's something. The internal affairs investigation at the Harwick County Sheriff's Department was assigned to a lieutenant named Yancey. Renata did not meet Lieutenant Yancey for the first 3 months. She met a department liaison named Goff, who kept rescheduling their calls and whose emails always included the phrase, "We take these matters seriously," in the second paragraph. She started saving every email. She started recording every phone call, which Gerald told her was legal under Maryland law so long as she was a party to the conversation. She bought a small digital recorder and kept it in her scrubs pocket. The recording from October 14th changed everything. Goff called at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday when Renata was in the hospital break room between patients. She stepped into the supply corridor and pressed record. Goff said the investigation had found no evidence of wrongdoing by Deputy Strick. He said the department was recommending the DA move forward with the obstruction charge. And then, at the very end, in a tone that was almost friendly, he said, "I don't know what you're hoping to get out of this, but I'll tell you, from experience, these things tend to go easier when people let them go." Renata said, "Are you advising me to drop my complaint?" Goff said, "I'm just saying, in my experience." She pressed stop. Gerald listened to the recording 3 times. "Okay," he said. "Now we have something." The case moved faster after that. Gerald filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office and simultaneously submitted the recording to a journalist at the Baltimore Chronicle who had covered sheriff's department misconduct in 3 previous stories. The Chronicle ran a piece on a Friday morning with the headline, "Nurse detained 41 minutes on Route 9. Department official urged her to let it go." By Friday afternoon, the Harwick County Sheriff had issued a statement saying the department was conducting a thorough and impartial review. By Monday, Lieutenant Yancey had called Gerald directly and asked for a meeting. Renata did not sleep well the Sunday before that meeting. She lay in her apartment and stared at the ceiling and thought about Strick standing on the shoulder of Route 9, telling her he detected alcohol, telling her she had failed the test she had not failed. She thought about the 41 minutes. She thought about the letter from the DA's office and the word combative applied to a person who had stood motionless in the cold with her hands at her sides. She thought about every patient she had ever had who came in not knowing what was wrong with them, scared and in pain, and trusting that the system around them would do the right thing. She thought about what it meant when the system didn't. She got up at 5 a.m. and made coffee and reviewed her 12 pages of notes again, not because she had forgotten anything, but because she needed to feel prepared. The meeting at the county administrative building lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes. Gerald was there. Renata was there. Lieutenant Yancey was there with the department's legal counsel, a woman named Ferraro, who asked questions in a tone that suggested she already knew the answers and did not much like them. Yancey had the traffic camera images. He had the analyst's report. He had the recording of Goff's call. He had Gerald's records request, showing that Strick had filed 3 prior complaints about alcohol-related stops that had resulted in clean blood draws. He had, it turned out, done his job thoroughly, which Renata had not been sure he would do until she sat across from him and watched his face while he laid out what he had found. Deputy Strick's account is inconsistent with the physical evidence, Yancey said. He said it flatly, like a fact, which it was. Goff was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. Strick was suspended pending a formal hearing. The DA withdrew the obstruction charge. None of that happened quietly. The Chronicle followed up. 2 other news outlets picked up the story. A state senator whose district included Route 9 issued a statement calling for a legislative review of safety corridor enforcement stops and their legal basis. Gerald gave an interview in which he mentioned, very specifically, the number 41. 41 minutes his client had stood on the shoulder of a highway in October in her scrubs while her uncle was in cardiac arrest 40 minutes away. Renata did not give interviews. Gerald asked her about it once, and she told him she needed to think about it. What she was actually thinking about was the thing that had happened in the break room after the Chronicle story ran. 3 of her colleagues, Abby from the overnight team, Marcus from the ER, a travel nurse named Cynthia, who had only been at St. Benedict 6 weeks, had come to find her individually to tell her about their own stops, their own moments. Not always on Route 9, not always strict, but the same general shape of thing. The same experience of standing somewhere and understanding that the account that would be written down later would not match what had actually happened. Renata listened to all three of them. She took notes. She gave Gerald their names with their permission. The formal hearing for Deputy Strick was held on a Thursday in late February. Renata testified. She had been in a courtroom before, once, for a patient whose family had filed suit against a prior employer, and she had given a deposition in a conference room. This was different. The room was larger and colder, and there were people in the gallery she didn't recognize. She found her mother's face in the third row, and her uncle Desmond, who had driven up from Ridgeway, and she fixed on them for one moment before she turned to face the panel. She told them what had happened in the order it had happened. She told them about the cones and the window and the license and the word alcohol, said with such certainty by a man who was wrong. She told them about 41 minutes. She told them about the needle wrapper, torn with his teeth. She told them about the email that arrived with no apology, and the letter from the DA's office with the word combative, describing something she had not done. She was asked on cross-examination whether she had at any point raised her voice at Deputy Strick. No, she said. Moved toward him? No. Made any gesture that could be interpreted as threatening? No, she said. I kept my hands at my sides. I had been taught to keep my hands visible in interactions with law enforcement. I did that. I stood there for 41 minutes in the cold, and I kept my hands at my sides the entire time. There was a silence in the room. Strick was terminated. The word came down 4 weeks after the hearing in a written decision that cited falsification of a law enforcement report, conduct unbecoming, and failure to operate body camera equipment in accordance with department policy. He lost his pension eligibility under the terms of the department's misconduct clause. Goff resigned before the investigation into his conduct was complete. He did not issue a public statement. The state senator's review of safety corridor enforcement procedures produced a bill in March that required any sheriff's department using the practice to register the stop formally with the state traffic authority within 24 hours, including officer name, stop location, stated reason for stop, and outcome. It passed the state Senate 31-17. The governor signed it on a Wednesday afternoon in a room that had reporters in it and cameras and people holding signs, and somewhere in the building Renata's name was mentioned 3 times. She wasn't there. She was at work. She had a double shift, and there was a patient on the 3rd floor who was not doing well, and someone needed to be there. Gerald texted her when it was done. It passed. She read it between patients, standing in the hallway outside room 318, and she felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have a precise clinical name for. Relief, maybe. Not exactly. More like the particular sensation of a weight you've been carrying so long you stop noticing it, and then one day you put it down and you can breathe in a way you forgot was possible. She texted back, "Good." Then she went back into room 318, and she did her job.